us that when Moshe Rabbeinu was sent by HaShem to bring a message to Paro, initially Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paro and said that HaShem sent him, and not only didn't it improve the situation, the Klal Yisrael were taxed to a greater extent, they were enslaved to a worse extent, and at a certain point it became clear that not only didn't Moshe Rabbeinu alleviate the situation, his going to Paro actually made the situation far worse. And after a certain point, Moshe Rabbeinu turned to HaShem and he said, Lama hare'osa lama zeh? Why have you made it worse for this nation? Lama zeh shalachtani? If you, HaShem, wanted to make it worse, don't involve me. Why are you involving me in this? And the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that HaShem was not very pleased with Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction. Matter of fact, the Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Chaval al da'avdin v'lo mishtachim. It's unfortunate that which was lost and can't be found anymore, because Hashem said, Kama palmi, many times I revealed myself to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they each should have asked many questions. I came to Avram and told him the entire land, all of Canaan is going to be yours. Then when he goes to bury Sarah, not only can he find a burial place, he has to buy it for a huge sum of money. But Avram didn't ask questions on me, Yitzchak didn't ask questions, nor did Yaakov. But you, Moshe, you're asking questions. Chaval al de'avdim v'lo mishtachim. They don't make them like they used to. You are not on the level of the Avos. And that's the Gemara that Rashi quotes later on in Chumash. And the question I'd like to ask on that Rashi and that Gemara really I think is an obvious one. And that is, the single greatest human being who ever existed was Moshe Rabbeinu. In the history of mankind, there was no human being who reached a greater level of perfection. The Achronim call Moshe Rabbeinu Bechir Shebemin Hanushi, the most perfect of any human being. And if you study the way Chazal depict Moshe Rabbeinu, it is clear that he was on a much higher level than even the Avos, even than Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yet this Gemara seems to be saying quite the opposite. As if to say, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, those were people, those were men. They don't make them like they used to. Yet we know clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu was much greater than the Avos. The question is, how are we to understand this Gemara that seems to imply that on some way, some level, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were greater than Moshe, when we know it's very much the opposite. So I'd like to spend a few minutes this evening seeing if we can understand what this Gemara is referring to and what it actually means. And to do that, I'd like to lay down two definitions. Concepts that we've heard for many years, ideas that we're somewhat familiar with, but the actual definition and the actual concepts are worth speaking out. First concept is something called Emunah. Emunah means, as the Rambam describes, understanding that there is no mikra. There's no coincidence, there's no happenstance. In fact, paraphrase, we say the words, Animamim b'emunah shalema, I believe with a total, complete belief. Shabori yisbarach, that Hashem hu borei umanig l'chol haburim. Hashem is the creator and one who runs all of the creations. V'ulavado asa ose v'yase l'chol hamasim, and He alone did, does, and will do all activities. Meaning nothing on this planet happens without Hashem's direct involvement. No car crashes, no human being ends up in a certain situation, no occurrence on the planet happens without Hashem's direct involvement. And that's Emunah, knowing that Hashem is involved in the running of the world. Bitachan is a very, very different sort of concept. Bitachan means I trusting in Hashem, taking my heavy load, taking my heavy burden and placing it on Hashem. And that's very different than Emunah. See, Emunah means knowing that Hashem runs the world. Maybe even knowing that Hashem runs my life. But that doesn't necessarily translate into trusting Hashem. Because believe it or not, a person could have a tremendous amount of Emunah and have very little Bitachan. And I'll give you a classic example. Paro. If you remember, the reason why Paro said, kill the Jewish babies by drowning them in the Nile. And the Gemara is very specific and very clear why he chose that way. He said Noach was saved from the Mabul. Hashem promised that He'll never bring another flood again. And Paro said, I know that Hashem always pays back midah keneged midah, measure for measure. If I drown the Jewish babies, what's Hashem going to want to do? Is Hashem's going to want to drown me with a flood. Since Hashem already promised that He's not going to do that, and Hashem always pays back measure for measure, therefore I'm safe. Paro commanded all of his people, drown the Jewish boys. Now let's understand this. The man clearly understands that Hashem is in charge. He understands that Hashem is powerful, and Hashem is watching. He understands the systems of Hashem. He understands that Hashem works midah keneged midah. He clearly has an awful lot of emunah, but zero bitachan. He doesn't trust in Hashem. Quite the opposite. He's working against Hashem. And it's not just people like Paro who could have emunah and not have bitachan. There was a fellow in yeshiva who once a week, almost literally once a week, we had to deprogram. He would come with these very complex plots, explaining, proving the following: Hashem is out to get me. And he would show detail by detail how Hashem was laying plans and plots and different things to trap him. The Eibishter is out to get me. That was his expression. He clearly had an awful lot of emunah because he would show you Hashem's direct involvement in his life. But no, bitachan. You see, bitachan means knowing that Hashem has my best interests at heart, knowing that Hashem is watching out for me, knowing that Hashem is more concerned for my benefit than even I am, and therefore I trust in Hashem. I take my heavy burden and I transfer it to Hashem, and that's miles and miles away from Emunah. Emunah is almost this sterile sort of theoretical understanding that Hashem is actively involved in the world. I can sit back, read the New York Times and say, wow, look at that. Hashem is directing the world, directing the events of the world, and that's Emunah. But Bitachan is very, very different. Bitachan is personal, and Bitachan is trusting in Hashem. Bitachan is knowing that Hashem knows what's good for me better than even I do, and therefore I don't ask questions. When something happens that's bad, when something happens that I look at and I say, this is the worst thing that could have possibly happened, Bitachan says, I know it's from Hashem. I know that Hashem has my best interest in heart, and therefore there's some better reason behind it. And I believe that that's the answer to this Gemara. If you would ask who is the human being who had the greatest level of emunah, there's no question it was Moshe Rabbeinu. Bas baklaria hami'iri means he saw it with total clarity. That means he saw Hashem with absolute total clarity. To me, the shender is real, it's right here. To Moshe Rabbeinu, that was Hashem present and accounted for right there. But that is very different than trusting in Hashem. The others did not have that level of clarity. They didn't have that same absolute clear vision, but they had more trust, they had more bitachan, and when things didn't quite look like they were right, when things look like, I don't know, it looks bad, apparently the others were on a greater level, because this concept of bitachan means trusting in Hashem, means relying on Hashem, judging Hashem favorably, and knowing that Hashem knows better than I what is for my good. And knowing that there are two very different concepts, emunah and then bitachan, is important for a person to grow. And I'd like to spend a little time now working on emunah, and then we'll spend a little time on bitachan and see if we could change somewhat our perspective. Let me share the following idea. There are 4 levels in emunah. The first 2 are rather simple. Number 3 is not so easy. And number 4 is where the real action's at. Number 1 is knowing that Hashem created the world. And that's something that you really don't have to be a great philosopher to understand. 90% of Americans will tell you that there's a creator to the world because there's such wisdom, there's such complex systems, such harmoniously integrated complex systems in the world that it's obvious that there's a creator. That doesn't take much work, although, by the way, it's worth thinking about, it's worth reading science textbooks, it's worth watching the world to grow in that understanding. But typically it's not the kind of thing that we have great sveikas, great questions about. Level 2 is a bit more advanced. Level 2 is knowing that Hashem is involved in the big picture issues of the world. Big picture issues mean things like hurricanes, famine, typhoons, really world-shaking events. I've often said it, if you'd like to know what Hashem does, all you have to do is read the headlines of the New York Times and know that those headlines were written on the previous Rosh Hashanah. But not just Rosh Hashanah's headlines, every single day's headlines of every newspaper was written by Hashem on the previous Rosh Hashanah, deciding which country to war, which nation to famine. The globe in totality is judged and its entire future is determined. And that perspective, being able to sort of step back and watch and see Hashem running the world, is the second level of Emunah, knowing that Hashem runs the big picture, the global scene. So those two are rather simple. Knowing that Hashem created the world. Number 2, knowing that Hashem runs the world in a big picture issue. Number 3 is a little bit trickier. Number 3 is where things get a little bit more demanding. You see, level 3 of Emunah is knowing that Hashem knows my thoughts. As I'm thinking them, as I'm contemplating, Hashem reads through me like a book. And that one isn't quite as simple on a practical day-to-day level. So I'd like to share with you a few examples that I think may help illustrate this idea. Imagine the following. Imagine you hear that Rabbi Schaefer is a very, very nice guy. A great guy. What a tzaddik, you won't believe it. And I heard that there's this old lady. Every single day, Rabbi Schaefer goes to this woman's apartment. He cleans the apartment. He shops for her. He's mamish on the floor scrubbing. What a tzaddik! Wow, amazing man, very impressive. And then you find out that this woman has no living heirs, and she does have an estate worth $50 million. Oh, I see. Maybe that great tzaddik is not scrubbing the floors thinking of chesed, but is scrubbing the floors thinking of his bank book. And he's thinking of how he's getting into that estate. And what you quickly understand is that the outside action is largely irrelevant. And here's the point. If I claim to believe in schar va'onish, if I claim that I believe in reward and punishment, then perforce I also believe that Hashem knows exactly my intention. Because the outside isn't where the action's at. If someone's on the floor scrubbing the floor, that doesn't determine whether that's a good act or a selfish act. His kavanah, his intentions are the determinant. And if I claim to believe in reward and punishment, then perforce I believe that Hashem knows exactly what my intentions are. And gentlemen, it doesn't take an awful lot of living to recognize that we never, ever get it right. When we have someone else pegged exactly where he is, and then we find out we don't have a clue, you begin understanding that the human is not so easy to peg. I'll give you an interesting story. There was a small shtibel in Lakewood, and they had decided that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur they didn't want children davening in that shtibel. There were many, many other shuls, many other shtibels within a very close proximity. This was a small shul, and they put up signs, please, if you want to bring your children, please go down the block, please go up the block. We would like to have a very specific and serious davening here. We'd prefer not having children. Put up signs, made the announcements, everything was ready. Rosh Hashanah day, the Gabbai who put up the signs, who made the entire machab, is in shul davening. Right in front of him walks in a man with 5 kids. But not just 5 kids. They sit down right there, and they start with first the candy wrappers, and then the throwing, and the back and the forth, and he's livid. I can't believe it. The sign is right up there. I made the announcement. Everybody knows it. And the chutzpah standing right in front of me. He's ready to lose it. Absolute self-control, not to say a word. And it gets worse and worse as the kids are pushing. And he's about to lose it when the father gets up to say Kaddish. And his 5 sons join him. And then he realizes that they lost their mother. They were still just barely out of Shiva. And the reason they didn't see the signs is because they were sitting Shiva for their mother. And boy, was he glad he didn't say a word. And you quickly recognize that we don't get but a very small glimpse of the whole picture. We're very quick to judge others. We're very quick to decide who's a good guy, who's not. But the reality is we don't know. You know, so-and-so, he doesn't learn a word. And then you find out that it was in 3rd grade. In 3rd grade, when they were learning how to read the ches with the commas under it, and they went over it and over it, and the Rebbe called on him and said, how do you read it? And he read Nocha, and the boys started laughing, and the Rebbe said, it's Noach, Noach. And the kid was so bushed out that his school career ended. You don't know that, you don't see that, but that is he. And if I claim that I believe in reward and punishment, then perforce I believe that Hashem knows exactly where I'm coming from, exactly where I'm at, and exactly what my intentions are when I do them. And in fact, if you'd like an exercise, a Musar exercise for this concept, I think there's a very, very good one. The next time you go to a science lab, many high schools have them, you'll see the lucite man. It's an image of a man, and the outside is this clear plastic sort of covering, and you could see right through it. You could see the heart, the lung, the pancreas, the stomach. That is I. I'm transparent. When I stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, davening Shemona Esrei, I'm like that lucite man. Hashem peers right into my heart, and Hashem knows exactly where I'm coming from, exactly my kavanah, exactly my intentions. And my friends, this concept is basic. When you daven Shemona Esrei tonight by Marav, remember at the end, when you say the words, Yehiyu l'ratzon imri fi, Hashem, the words of my mouth should find favor in your eyes. Vehegyon libi, and the thoughts of my heart. Not just my words, but the thoughts of my heart. Right before the end of Shemona Esrei, right before Lakai Netzor, say that pasuk and understand that I am transparent in front of Hashem. Hashem reads my heart, reads my thoughts exactly as I'm thinking them. And that is the 3rd level of Emunah, knowing that Hashem knows exactly where I'm coming from. So, if level 1 is knowing that Hashem created the world, level 2 is knowing that Hashem is involved in the big picture issues, and level 3 is knowing that Hashem knows my kavanah, my intentions, level 4 is a big quantum leap forward. Because level 4 is understanding that Hashem is intimately involved in the runnings of my life. Not just way up there, 13 billion light years up in the heavens, but Hashem is on the scene, completely, totally involved in the goings-ons in my life. When I get up in the morning, when I go to sleep at night, when I get into my car, when I leave my car, Hashem is right there involved. And that concept is not quite as easy to grip, not quite as easy to feel. And I'd like to share with you just a couple of points that may make it a little bit easier to understand. One, I think, is a very interesting story. It was a number of years ago when I was called down. My mother, Allah Shalom, was ill, and I was told to come. And to give you an idea of how serious it was, I was young at the time. I had never learned Hilchos Avelis. I was studying Hilchos Avelis, laws of mourning, on the way down. I'm waiting for the plane. I'm in the airport, and I have a sefer open, and I'm studying there. And for some reason, I look up, and I see a ways down in the airport lobby over there, a very well-dressed gentleman looking directly at me. I don't think much about it. I go back to learning. A few minutes later, for some reason, I look up, and I see the same well-dressed gentleman still looking directly at me. Go back to learning. A few minutes later, the same scene, He's still looking at me. Whatever. I don't think much about it. I get on the plane. A few minutes after I sit down, who should sit down next to me but the very well-dressed gentleman sits down right next to me, and I'm saying to myself, oh my goodness, the 21st century, what is this about? Whatever. I open my sefer, and the first hour, not a problem. I'm learning, complete silence. After that hour, the gentleman sitting next to me says, I see you're very engrossed in your studies. May I ask what it is that you're studying? And I said, well, it's the Jewish laws of mourning. He said, oh, that's very interesting. Are you a rabbi? I said, well, I happen to be. He said, that's so interesting because I'm a priest. And I knew what was coming. Oh, this is great. We're going to have an interfaith dialogue at 35,000 feet. This is so romantic. Just what I was in the mood for, just what I asked for. Now, gentlemen, let me be honest. I am typically very polite, and I try to be very careful. And I usually enjoy these type of dialogues because I find them very interesting. But this was not the day, not the time for this type of discussion. But he began asking questions back and forth, and at a certain point, that was it. I said, we're done. It's gloves off. If we're going to do this, we're doing it right. So I said to myself that part. I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? He said, no, please, go ahead. Tell me, I said, we're on a plane, 35,000 feet. You know, a little dangerous up here, don't you think? He said, it could be. I said, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you believe that God decrees who lives and who dies? Oh, yes, and he rolls his eyes and quotes some verses, poorly translated psukim. Oh, yes, God decrees who lives and who dies, and the rain fall, and it's time. I'd like to ask you a very simple question. You know, there could be a terrorist on this plane, and he could pull a pin on a grenade, and we're dead. Or who knows, the stewardess can open the emergency door, and the plane could implode. Or the pilot could just lose consciousness. What good is God decree when we're here in the hands of man? And he looks at me with the glazy-eyed look as he says, the ways of God are mysterious. And I wanted to grab the guy. Nardubis. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. But don't get that glazed over look when you say the ways of God are mysterious. But my friends, this point is not a small philosophical point. You see, when you're walking on a cold February evening and a car pulls up and 3 thugs jump out and surround you and they hold a gun to your head, you have to come to one core recognition. And that recognition is, what good is God's decree on the previous Rosh Hashanah, whether you will live or die, when your life is in the hands of some drug-crazed kid? And that question is a major philosophical question. Emunah tells us the answer to that question. Emunah tells us that if Hashem decrees who will live and who will die, then perforce Hashem is on the scene to carry out that decree. And what that means in plain, simple language is, if my time is up, it's over. There is nothing that I can do. I'm gone. It's finished. However, if on the previous Rosh Hashanah Hashem decreed that I should live, then there'll be 10,000 different ways that Hashem will save me. The gun will blow up in his hand. He'll drop the gun. The New York City Fire Department will show up on a false alarm. Some cab driver will stop and ask for directions. Many shlichim, many messengers that Hashem will send. But Emunah demands the following. If I accept that Hashem decrees who will live and who will die, then perforce I accept the fact that Hashem is on the scene to carry out that decree. The imlav came because if not so, then Hashem's decree is empty and meaningless. And when I sit there on Rosh Hashanah and say the words, Hashem, I know you are sealing my fate, what I'm also saying is, I know that you're on the scene 24/7, 365 to carry out that decree. And what that means is, when I get up in the morning, when I go to sleep at night, as I go about my busy day, as I go about all the various activities of my day, Hashem is right there. You see, in our modern, technologically advanced days, it doesn't take much to end the human life. If you're not sure, just open the papers. You'll find untold ways of dying. You know, a few hundred years ago, there was only basically one or two ways of dying. You either got the Black Plague or you got hit by a horse and buggy, but that was it. There are so many ways of no longer being here today. And you read about them, and you understand. And if I accept the fact that Hashem decrees who will live and who will die, that means I accept the fact that Hashem is on the scene to carry that out. And that means when I get in the elevator and the door opens and I put my foot down. You ever hear about that story? The door is open, the guy put his foot down, but there was no cab. The elevator cab wasn't there. To his demise. When I get in my car, by the way, gentlemen, the New York highway system is a very frightening place. Do you know in the United States of America, would you like to know how many fatalities there are a year? Well, I'll give you an inkling. 50,000 U.S. soldiers died in the entire Vietnam years of war. Well, 50,000 people die each year on the U.S. highway system. As many soldiers as were lost in Vietnam. Pretty scary thought, huh? Think about that. Next time you get on a highway and you're driving at 55, because that's the speed limit, not at 75, but at 55 miles an hour, think about that statistic. And you say, oh my goodness, I better get off this. A highway is scary. I'm going to stick to local streets. But then you read about the fact that there are more accidents on local streets. Oh my goodness, I better get on the highway. But there are more fatalities. What do I do? You quickly recognize the fact that life is a dangerous experience. But you see, Emunah means knowing that Hashem is there when I'm getting behind the wheel of my car and that drunk is either going to make the left turn or the right turn. Whether he's going to get into my lane or not, Hashem is on the scene directing that. I may not be aware of it, but as he's getting in his car and for some strange reason he drops his keys, and as a result it takes him another 10 minutes to get behind the wheel of his car, I'm safely at home before he crashes into somebody else. That's Hashem. But knowing that if I accept the fact that Hashem runs this world, I also perforce accept the fact that Hashem is right there on the scene 24/7, 365 is a basic. Because again, otherwise the whole concept of understanding that Hashem decrees is meaningless and empty. And this is all in the world of Emunah. This is in the world of Emunah, and this is understanding Hashem's involvement in the world. But none of this has anything to do with Bitachan. You see, Bitachan is qualitatively a different concept altogether. Bitachan means learning to trust in Hashem. Learning that I am but a mortal human being. I can do some things, but there are many, many things that are beyond my capacity. But more than that, I'm limited, and I know that Hashem has my best interest in heart, and I take my very, very heavy burden and I transfer it to Hashem. That concept is many, many miles beyond any sort of Emunah. Because Emunah means knowing that Hashem is there, knowing that Hashem is making sure that I'm alive. Bitachan is then learning to trust in Hashem before I get in the car saying, Hashem, I rely on you. I cannot do this on my own. I can't control my destiny. And that concept of Bitachan requires an awful lot of work and requires a lot more understanding. If you'd like to know the real manifestations of Bitachan, even if you have Emunah, even if you have a great level of Emunah, does not mean you have very much Bitachan. The two biggest manifestations of Bitachan are, number one, do you ever feel anxious, nervous? How am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to pay the mortgage? I'm going to the doctor. I'm going to the dentist. That one gets me nervous too. I got problems and I don't know what's going to be. You see, anxiety, nervousness means that I'm in big trouble. I'm in big trouble means I'm in this big world all by my lonesome and I'm in serious trouble. If I know that Hashem is completely involved in the runnings of my life, if I know that Hashem is my best interest at heart, if I know that Hashem loves me more than I love me, and more than that Hashem knows exactly what's good for me to an extent that I can't even begin to know, and Hashem is running my life, doing things for me, where's room for anxiety, nervousness? What does that mean? It's not possible. And anxiety, nervousness, is one of the key simanim, key signs of lack of bitachon. But there's a second one that I think is also a bit innocuous, seeming, but is also a sign of a lack of bitachon. I'll share with you what that is. It was a number of years ago when I was a bit of a fan of Amazon.com. This was way before it went public, and I'm not going to date myself over here, folks, but I was buying books on Amazon.com when it was just a newbie business, and I was amazed by the fact that the books always came on time, every time exactly as promised. They were properly wrapped. The company really seemed to have it together. As it turned out, it went public. The news came out that Jeff Bezos was going public, and I said to my wife as follows. We're not wealthy, but I said, listen, I'd like to buy into the IPO. This was the days of, raging IPOs. I said, I'd like to take $2,000 and buy the stock. My wife said, fine. So I decided the next day I was going to buy $2,000 worth of Amazon.com. That evening, for some strange reason, my wife opens up Newsweek to a part of the paper that she almost never reads, the business section, and they start ripping in, Jeff Bezos, what a clown. They almost said, call him bozo. $15 a share, he has $1 million in personal credit cards out there. There's no way the company has anywhere near that value. It's the biggest hoax, on and on. My wife brings me the article and says, we can't do it. You can't spend $2,000 on this. I said, all right, fine, I'm not doing it. Okay. Had I bought those $2,000 worth of Amazon.com and held that till now, it would now be worth about $1.5 million. Now, Baruch Hashem, we don't lack, but I could think of some clever things to do with $1.5 million. But here's the point. Regret, shucks, could've, should've, would've, is a lack of bitachon. You see, if I understand that the amount of money I am to make has been set on the previous Rosh Hashanah, and not by accident, not because Hashem doesn't have enough money, and not because Hashem doesn't really want to give me what I need, but the amount of money is set because this is what's good for me, then the concept of shucks, should've, doesn't exist in my mindset. You see, regret is a sign of a lack of bitachon. Oh, I should have done this, could have done that, I would have. If these are things, purchases, investments, business deals, then that is a lack of bitachon. Now don't get me wrong, if you made an error in judgment, if you were lazy, if you didn't do what you should have regret. But if you went about the course of your life in a rational, responsible way, and you didn't buy X stock, you didn't buy that house on the corner, you didn't go ahead and open a given business. The concept of bitachon means knowing that Hashem knows better than I what's for my good, what's in my best interest, and Hashem is running the world for my good. These concepts are very, very easy in theoretical terms. To trust in Hashem, to know that Hashem runs the world, but in a practical, day-to-day, real existence, real Emunah and real Bitachan is a very, very difficult exercise. And the way a person comes to it is with years and years of living. You see, life offers a person many, many great opportunities. There's no substitute in the world for life experiences. And sometimes you wonder, why did I have to go through that? I needed that situation. And then many years later you appreciate the fact that you're a different person because you experienced that. You cannot grow in Emunah. You certainly cannot grow in Bitachan without great challenges. When you find yourself in very serious trouble, not being able to make ends meet, not knowing how you're going to put your kids through yeshiva, not knowing if you're going to make it, and you then learn to trust in Hashem, that's the way a person grows in Bitachan. But you cannot sit in the Beis Medrash, you cannot open a Mussar Sefer and grow in Bitachan. The only way to grow in it is you study the concepts in the Beis Medrash, you work on them in your mind, but it's the life experience, going through those situations in life, and then really, really practicing it. That's how a person actually grows in Bitachan. I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from this Chazal. There was no human being alive who ever reached the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. With a total clarity, like the Shtender is here, he saw Hashem right there, vividly, graphically, as he walked, as he breathed, throughout his day, Hashem was present right there. And that level of Emunah, no other human being ever reached, nor ever will reach. But yet, while that's true, he was not the greatest in terms of Bitachan. The Avos were greater, because Bitachan is not just knowing that Hashem runs the world. Bitachan is then learning to trust Hashem. Bitachan is learning to say the words, I don't know. I really don't know. And my friends, I believe that 90% of our Emunah problems is based on one simple mistake. I've mentioned this before, but I believe it bears repeating. Most people who have kashas on Hashem have those questions because they play God. They know exactly what they need. I need this job. I need to marry this person. I need my kids to get into this school. This is what I need. And for some reason, God just won't play with my game. I don't get it. It's for my best. It's what I need. And for some reason, Hashem just won't help me. Hashem, what's wrong? I'm doing your ratzon. I'm serving you. I'm learning. I'm davening. Why won't you just help me and give me what I need? And as long as you have that mindset, I guarantee you will have many, many questions on Hashem. But that's because you're playing God. You see, the role of the mortal human is to recognize the fact that I am but a mortal human being. I see things in front of me in the right here and now, but I don't see 2 years into the future. I don't see 5 years into the future. I surely don't see 20 years into the future. There was a fellow in Rochester, a very talented, very skilled programmer, when computer programming was considered a very good field to be in. And no one could understand it. He lost his job for 5 years. He could not get another job. Tema. From guy, kids in yeshiva, he could not get a job. It was so bad that he actually had to leave Rochester. He ended up in New York. Got a job there, and a funny sort of thing happened. His kids ended up in very different yeshivas in New York. And his kids flourished, and his kids became tremendous individuals, and I don't believe they would have been a tenth of who they are now had they remained there, because the yeshivas that they needed were in New York. The yeshivas that they needed were not there. He didn't know it. You and I would not have known it. But trusting in Hashem means trusting in Hashem as a much wider view of life, a much broader view of this existence. Hashem knows what's good for me far better than I do. I don't know what I need 2 years from now, 10 years. I got to marry this woman. She's the perfect shidduch. It's my bashert, and I know what Hashem is messing me up. And then you hear about this couple and that couple screaming, yelling, ranting, raving, the get to follow thereafter. And you quickly understand that what you know about your personality, what you know about your needs, is not that great. Bitachan is predicated on an understanding that Hashem has my interests at heart. Hashem knows better than I what my needs are, and therefore I take my heavy burden and I trust in Hashem. And that's worlds and worlds different than Emunah. You could have a tremendous level of Emunah. Paro saw Hashem intricately involved in the runnings of the world. Paro said, kill the Jewish boys by drowning them, because he knew the system via which Hashem ran the world. But Paro had no Bitachan. So to a fellow in yeshiva who showed all the plans that Hashem had to get him, had no Bitachan. He had Emunah because he saw Hashem involved, but that doesn't translate into Bitachan. Emunah means seeing Hashem's involvement. Bitachan means trusting in Hashem. In the world of Emunah, there are 4 levels. Simply, 1 is knowing Hashem created the world. 2 is knowing that Hashem is involved in the big picture items. Number 3 is a lot more difficult. Number 3 is knowing that Hashem reads through me like a book. I'm the transparent man. When I daven Shemona Esrei, I don't have to really say the words. I don't really have to tell Hashem what I'm thinking. Hashem reads through me. Hashem knows my thoughts. Hashem is right there. And that requires a bit more understanding, but level 4 is the ultimate level. Level 4 is knowing that Hashem is right there on the scene, and if that's not true, then the entire concept of Hashem being involved in the world doesn't make any sense. But all of that still falls short from Bitachan, because Bitachan is that final realization that I cannot control my destiny. I cannot determine whether tomorrow morning I wake up and open my eyes or not. I cannot determine whether I will live for X amount of years or not. That's within Hashem's control, and then I learn to trust in Hashem. That level is many, many leagues beyond simple Emunah. I'd like to close with a story that I think very well encapsulates these concepts. Many people here may know the individual in the story. It's actually a fellow who learned here in the yeshiva. He was in the kollel. His name is Chaim Trapper. And the story goes as follows. It was a Thursday night when Chaim's wife got a call from her sister. They had all planned to be at Chaim's house for Shabbos. And his wife called up, his sister called up Chaim's wife and said, my husband Ruvain, he's very tired, he doesn't want to come, we're going to stay home for Shabbos. Chaim's wife said, you can't say that, I cooked, you can't not come, we can't back and forth, do come, don't come back. Finally they said, listen, I'll tell you what. Chaim's wife said, I cooked, I prepared everything, I'll bring the food, we'll all go to your house. So in fact that's what they did. Instead of everybody coming to Chaim's house at Shabbos, everyone went to the sister-in-law's house that Shabbos. Okay. Now Chaim is a big masmid, and he described something to me that he said was very, very unusual. He walked into the apartment Friday afternoon and on the coffee table saw a book called Who by Fire. Now, if you haven't read this book, it's a very, very powerful book. It's a book about a woman who was living in Yerushalayim and her apartment caught fire. And she escaped. She ran right out the door. And when she got out the door, she realized that her children were still inside. She ran back in, grabbed one kid, ran back in, grabbed a second. She ran back in, saved every one of her children. But when she was done, she suffered burns on 85% of her body. And the story is a beautiful, beautiful story of her Emunah, of her Bitachan. But you also see an awful lot of pain that she suffered. Chaim said he picked up that book and he was transfixed. He couldn't put it down, and he finished the book cover to cover during that Shabbos, something he never would have done normally. He didn't think much about it. That Shabbos mincha, he walked into yeshiva. When he got to yeshiva, he went into the Beis Medrash, and he noticed when he walked into the Beis Medrash, like everyone was looking at him. My tie, my suit. Didn't think much about it. He down Shmon Esrei, after taking 3 steps back, he looks up and he sees all eyes upon him. What's the deal? And when the ladder was, he goes over to his friend of his after mincha, and he says to his friend, "What's the deal? Why is everybody staring at me?" His friend says, "You didn't hear? Hear what? Oh, well, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but last night your house burned down." What do you mean? What happened? What happened was unclear exactly, but apparently in the basement there was a boiler. It exploded. It was a 3-family house. There were 2 other families actually in the house on Shabbos. They were very, very severely injured with some fatalities. But Chaim and his family were not there. But that wasn't really the moral of the story. You see, the fact that he read that book was there, that he was transfixed by that book, was Hashem sending him a message, what it means, mi ba'esh, what it means to be burnt by fire. But that was not really the focal point. The focal point wasn't even that Thursday night conversation between his wife and her sister, the pivot of whether he lived or died. The pivot of that entire event was the previous Rosh Hashanah, when it was decided whether he and his family should live and have a very healthy, successful year, or Rahman Islam, the opposite. And then everything that follows suit is Hashem just carrying out that decree. But that's a basic of Emunah. That when I stand in Rosh Hashanah and I say the words, Hashem, you decide, I also accept the fact that Hashem is on the scene 24/7, 365 to carry it out. And that is a very high level of Emunah. But the next step is the critical one. The next step is once I get that, and once I understand that Hashem has my best interests at heart, but more than that Hashem is concerned for my good more than I am, that Hashem loves me more than I love myself, and that Hashem knows what's good for me far better than I do, then I can learn to trust in Hashem. I can learn to take my heavy burden and say, Hashem, you're in charge. There's no anxiety, there's no nervousness, there's no regrets. Hashem, I trust in you. You're the Bailam, you're the creator of this world. I trust in you. And that is a very, very high level of Bitachan. Emunah. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us the wisdom, understanding, ability to put this into practice.